They say family is a safe harbor, but sometimes blood relatives are the monsters who push you off the edge. My sister kicked me out into the freezing Chicago snow on Thanksgiving night because my poverty ruined the fake high society illusion she built for her fiancé. She had no idea that in my darkest hour, I found the keys to a shadow empire. 10 years later, my wedding became the glorious slaughterhouse she willingly walked right into. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Vivian Revenge Stories, and unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without a budget to operate. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you, which you can do by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the description or comments below. My name is Reagan Armstrong. I am 25 years old, and right now, I am standing in the brutal, driving snow of a Chicago winter. The biting wind off Lake Michigan whipped through my thin, frayed coat like shattered glass, biting at my exposed skin and numbing my fingers. I stood on the immaculate, heated pavement outside my family's luxury Gold Coast apartment building. Above me, warm golden light spilled from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite. Inside, the air undoubtedly smelled of roasted turkey, expensive vintage wine, and warm cinnamon. Out here, the air just tasted like ice, misery, and heavy exhaust fumes. The contrast was a cruel joke. The heavy oak double doors of the grand foyer were cracked open just enough for the bitter cold to rush inside, but nowhere near enough to let me step through the threshold. Blocking the entrance stood my older sister, Sloane. She was draped in a tailored crimson silk dress, her hair perfectly styled in effortless waves, wearing a heavy diamond necklace that caught the warm chandelier light from the hallway behind her. Standing just over her shoulder was our mother, Evelyn, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, looking at me as if I were a diseased stray animal that had wandered onto her pristine porch. "You cannot be here, Reagan," Sloane hissed, her eyes darting nervously back into the foyer, keeping her voice low so the elite guests inside would not hear the disruption. "Julian's parents are arriving in 10 minutes. They are real estate royalty in this city. Look at you. You look like you just crawled out of a wet dumpster." I looked down at my scuffed, waterlogged boots and the damp, freezing hem of my cheap jeans. I was freezing to the bone, utterly exhausted, and I had not eaten a proper meal in 3 days. "It is Thanksgiving, Sloane," I said, my voice hoarse and trembling from the cold. "I just wanted a hot plate of food and a place to sit. I have nowhere else to go tonight." "That is absolutely not my problem," Sloane snapped, her manicured fingernails gripping the edge of the heavy door. "We have a highly specific image to maintain, a flawless personal brand. Your pathetic, unemployed, poverty-stricken existence is a massive stain on this family. If Julian's mother sees you standing in our doorway looking like a homeless beggar, it will ruin everything I have worked for." The sheer audacity of her words felt like a physical blow to my chest, yet it was absolutely nothing compared to the massive knife she had already buried deep in my back 2 years ago. I used to be a brilliant, highly sought-after software engineer. I had a lucrative 6-figure salary, a beautiful apartment, and a limitless future in the tech industry. Then, Sloane decided she wanted to play the role of a glamorous tech entrepreneur. She secretly accessed my secure servers and stole the proprietary predictive trading algorithm I had spent thousands of agonizing hours writing from scratch. She pitched my life's work to venture capitalists as her own brilliant creation, securing tens of millions in seed funding. When the original cybersecurity firm I worked for noticed the glaring code similarities, Sloane enacted a brilliant, evil backup plan. She manipulated the digital trail, hiring dark web fixers to make it look like I had committed severe cybersecurity copyright infringement to sabotage her startup. I lost my career, my spotless reputation, and my engineering license. I was buried under a massive mountain of legal debt, entirely blacklisted from the entire industry. I lost my home, my friends, and my sanity, all while Sloane built her shiny new empire on top of my stolen genius. My mother stepped forward, her face a cold mask of aristocratic irritation. She reached into her designer leather clutch and pulled out a crumpled $50 bill. She reached past Sloane and shoved the wrinkled paper into my freezing, trembling hand. "Take this," Evelyn commanded coldly, her eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. "Go find a fast food drive-thru down the street. Buy yourself a cheap, greasy burger and go back to whatever miserable, damp hole you're sleeping in these days. Do not come back here. Do not call us. Stop trying to stand in the way of your sister's incredibly bright future. You are an embarrassment to us." "Mom," I whispered, the single word tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. "Goodbye, Reagan," Evelyn said, turning her back on me and taking a sip of her champagne. Sloane did not even bother to offer a fake goodbye. She just sneered, a look of pure, unadulterated disgust crossing her beautiful features, stepped back, and slammed the heavy oak door completely shut. The metallic, heavy click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed loudly over the howling wind, finalizing my exile. I stood entirely alone in the blizzard. The heavy snow gathered on my shoulders and in my hair, melting into the cheap fabric of my coat. But I suddenly no longer felt the biting cold. I looked down at the crumpled $50 bill resting in my numb palm. Slowly, deliberately, my fingers curled inward, crushing the paper into a tight, hard ball until my knuckles turned stark white. I did not shed a single tear. The crushing grief, the despair, and the desperate, pathetic longing for my family's love and validation evaporated completely into the freezing winter air. In its place, a dark, freezing, absolute rage settled deep inside my chest. It was a terrifying, beautiful clarity that I had never experienced before. They had taken my life's work, my money, my good name, and my fundamental human dignity. They had thrown me to the wolves, fully expecting me to quietly freeze and die in the cold darkness so they could shine in the light. I stared up at the glowing, opulent windows of the penthouse suite. They thought I was a weak, pathetic victim. They thought they had won the war. I stood in the snow and made a silent, unbreakable vow to the winter night. I would not just take back what they stole from me. I would systematically dismantle their flawless, gilded brand brick by bloody brick. I would make them pay for every single ounce of dignity they stripped from me, and I would not stop. I would not rest, until they had absolutely nothing left but the clothes on their backs. The walk from the Gold Coast to the financial district took exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes. I did not feel my feet hitting the icy pavement. I was a ghost haunting my own life. My destination was a massive, unmarked, brutalist skyscraper in the Loop. Floor 47, the subterranean heart of Ethelgard Dynamics. They were a titan in the tech investment world, managing hundreds of billions of dollars. Yet you would never find their name on a billboard or a glossy magazine cover. They preferred the shadows. And that is exactly where they kept me. My job was officially listed as overnight systems maintenance, which was a polite corporate term for a glorified server janitor. While the rest of the city slept off their heavy turkey dinners, I walked the narrow aisles of the cooling rooms. The humming of the massive server racks was the only sound in the dead, sterile air. The blinking blue and green LED lights washed over my face, replacing the freezing Chicago wind with the dry, artificial chill of heavy-duty air conditioning. I preferred this mechanical hum to human voices. Machines did not lie to you. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning when I noticed the anomaly. I was sitting at a secondary terminal, supposed to be running routine diagnostic checks on the cooling valves, but my eyes wandered to a restricted data stream. It was Ethelgard's high-frequency automated trading system, a colossal, predatory algorithm designed to buy and sell massive blocks of assets in fractions of a millisecond. It was brilliant, but it was flawed. I saw it almost immediately. There was a microscopic blind spot in the predictive routing logic, a tiny gap of maybe 3 milliseconds where the system exposed itself to latency arbitrage. In layman's terms, they were bleeding millions of dollars a month without even realizing it. I should have looked away. I should have done my janitorial duties and gone to sleep. But the code called to me like an open wound begging to be sutured. I walked into the desolate employee break room, grabbed a black dry erase marker, and stood in front of the massive, empty whiteboard. I uncapped the marker and let my mind completely detach from the miserable reality of my existence. For the next 2 hours, I thought only about the pure, beautiful logic of mathematics. I wrote furiously, erasing and rewriting lines of complex algorithmic structure, completely redesigning their trading logic from the ground up to close the latency gap and weaponize the blind spot against competing algorithms. I was so deep in the flow state that I did not hear the door open. You are creating a highly illegal bottleneck in a federally regulated trading stream. The voice was low, gravelly, and entirely calm. I spun around, dropping the marker on the linoleum floor. Standing in the doorway was an elderly man holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs. He was wearing a faded gray cardigan and simple trousers. He looked like a retired history professor, but his pale eyes held the terrifying, crushing weight of a collapsing star. I knew exactly who he was. Everyone in the underground tech world knew the whispers. This was Harrison Sterling, the reclusive billionaire founder of Ethelgard Dynamics, a man who allegedly had not been seen in public in over 1 decade. I braced myself to be fired. I braced myself for security to drag me out, adding another criminal trespassing charge to my ruined record. I stood completely still, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. Sterling walked slowly into the room, his eyes scanning the dense mathematical architecture I had scrawled across the whiteboard. He did not look angry. He looked fascinated. He looked past the cheap, damp clothes I was wearing and peered directly into the burning, furious core of my mind. He saw the absolute ruthlessness I had just discovered within myself. He recognized the dangerous, beautiful fire of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. He stepped forward and held out one of the ceramic mugs. I took it hesitantly. It was black coffee, scorching hot and bitter. "You have a brilliant mind, but you are wasting it on building things for other people to steal," Sterling said softly, his gaze locking onto mine. He gestured to the whiteboard. "This is cute, but it is just plumbing. I have a question for you, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Do you want to be the garbage collector, or do you want to own the dump?" I took a slow sip of the scalding coffee. The heat burned my throat, washing away the last lingering chill of the winter night. "I want to own the dump," I answered, my voice steady and completely devoid of hesitation. "And I want to tear down the surrounding neighborhoods." A slow, dangerous smile crept across Sterling's weathered face. "Good." That Thanksgiving night, Harrison Sterling broke every conventional corporate rule and took me on as his secret protege. He did not formally hire me into his executive program. I remained a ghost in the system. But the education I received in the hidden executive suites of Ethelgard Dynamics over the following months was something you could never learn at Harvard or Wharton. Sterling did not teach me how to write better code. He told me that coders were just modern-day bricklayers. Instead, he taught me the dark, intricate art of shadow banking. He showed me how to construct impenetrable shell companies nested within shell companies across international borders. He taught me the brutal mechanics of hostile corporate takeovers. Most importantly, he taught me the supreme power of leverage. He showed me how to take a company's debt, wrap it in legal chains, and turn it into a weapon of absolute destruction. "Cash is nothing but paper," Sterling remarked one evening as we combed through the toxic assets of a collapsing enterprise. "Debt is leverage, and leverage acts as a tether. Slip the right tether around someone's throat, and they will gladly tie their own noose for you." I devoured each teaching with a fierce, almost frightening appetite. That innocent, idealistic programmer who once shivered out in the winter cold was irrevocably dead. In her place, a financial predator was born in the shadows of Ethelgard. I was no longer writing code to build systems. I was writing financial algorithms to dismantle them. I was meticulously forging the invisible chains I would one day use to drag my enemies into the abyss. The game had completely changed, and I was learning to become the house. 10 years vanished into the relentless, mechanical hum of high finance. Harrison Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep exactly 5 years ago, leaving the entirety of the Ethelgard Dynamics asset portfolio under my absolute and unquestioned control. I did not mourn him with tears or public displays of affection. I mourned him by taking the empire he built and multiplying its wealth tenfold through sheer, unadulterated ruthlessness. Today, I am the phantom chief executive officer of an investment fund managing over $80 billion in global assets. My name appears on absolutely zero public corporate registries. I operate exclusively through a complex, impenetrable labyrinth of offshore shell companies, blind trusts, and proxy boards located in tax havens around the world. To the broader corporate world, Ethelgard Dynamics is a faceless apex predator that swallows failing companies whole. To me, it is the perfectly sharpened guillotine I have spent a decade carefully polishing in the dark. While I was busy buying sovereign debt and dismantling international monopolies, my sister Sloane and her husband Julian were busy pretending to be corporate royalty. They were constantly plastered across the glossy covers of luxury real estate magazines, flashing brilliant, artificially whitened veneers, and wearing custom designer suits that cost more than most people make in a year. They projected an image of invincible generational wealth. But balance sheets and algorithms do not care about magazine covers or public relations campaigns. I knew the absolute truth because I had been tracking their financial heartbeat every single day for 3,650 days. Julian had recklessly leveraged everything they owned to fund a colossal, state-of-the-art server data center just outside the city limits. It was a massive gamble built on a foundation of sand, and it was spectacularly failing. Severe supply chain issues, rising interest rates, and his own catastrophic mismanagement had bled his operating capital completely dry. He was currently drowning in hundreds of millions of dollars of high-yield distressed debt. Debt that I, operating through an aggressive proxy acquisition firm named Vanguard Capital, had quietly purchased for pennies on the dollar just last week. I was sitting in the quiet, temperature-controlled isolation of my $20 million penthouse overlooking the glowing Chicago skyline when my private, heavily encrypted phone vibrated. I had specifically assigned a dedicated burner number to forward calls from my old life, keeping it active for a decade just in case the rats ever tried to reach out. The digital caller identification displayed Sloane's name. It was the very first time she had attempted to contact me in exactly 10 years. I pressed the answer button, held the device to my ear, and remained perfectly silent. "Reagan, is that you?" Sloane asked. Her voice was dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet condescension. It was the exact tone of a wealthy socialite tossing stale breadcrumbs to a diseased pigeon in the park. "It is me," I replied, deliberately keeping my voice flat, dull, and entirely devoid of life. I needed to sound exactly like the broken, defeated, and exhausted woman she desperately wanted me to be. "Well, look who is still alive," Sloane sighed dramatically, her voice echoing slightly as if she were pacing in a large marble room. "Listen, I am extremely busy managing my charities, so I will make this quick. Julian and I are feeling a bit charitable today. We know you are probably still struggling, scraping by doing whatever miserable little jobs you can find in the gutters. Julian desperately needs a temporary janitorial crew to clean his executive offices this weekend before a major investor tour. I convinced him to let you come in and do the scrubbing. It pays $15 an hour. Consider it a generous handout so you do not starve to death this month." I looked across the expanse of my massive mahogany desk at the array of glowing monitors. Displayed in high definition on the primary screen was the bleeding red financial ledger of Julian's holding company. I literally owned the mortgage on the building she was currently asking me to scrub on my hands and knees. "Thank you, Sloan," I said, injecting just enough pathetic desperation and gratitude into my voice to feed her colossal ego. "I really need the money right now. I will be there." "See that you are. And use the rear service elevator so the actual employees do not have to look at you," she snapped, abruptly terminating the connection. I placed the phone face down on the desk and let a cold, razor-sharp smile touch my lips. Sloan truly thought she was asserting her dominance, but her transparent phone call was a glaring beacon of Julian's absolute terrifying desperation. I reached out and pulled up the highly classified architectural blueprints for Julian's failing data center project on my secondary monitor. I had analyzed these documents thoroughly and found the microscopic, fatal flaw in his zoning application. To secure the final municipal power grid permit, Julian legally needed to acquire and demolish a decaying, obsolete electrical substation located immediately adjacent to his property line. That rotting piece of industrial infrastructure originally belonged to our late father. Upon his death, the property deed was legally split. 50% went directly to Sloan. The other 50% remained strictly and irrevocably in my name. Julian could not legally break ground, he could not secure his final government permits, and he could not stop his furious investors from pulling out their funding unless I physically signed over my half of that seemingly worthless concrete box. Sloan did not call me out of sisterly pity or a desire to humiliate me with a mop. They urgently needed my signature to save their drowning, pathetic empire, and they arrogantly thought they could buy my birthright for a few hours of minimum-wage janitorial work. The trap was now perfectly set, and the prey was blindly, willingly, begging to be slaughtered. The service elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor, depositing me into a private foyer paved entirely in imported, flawless white Italian marble. I had meticulously curated my wardrobe for this specific performance. I was wearing a faded, oversized gray hoodie that had frayed cuffs, a pair of cheap denim jeans with worn-out knees, and scuffed canvas sneakers that squeaked obnoxiously against the pristine stone floor. I looked exactly like a broken, desperate woman who had spent the last decade being ground into dust by the unforgiving gears of poverty. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors into Julian's primary executive suite. The room was a grotesque monument to unearned arrogance. It featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a sweeping view of the Chicago skyline, custom mahogany paneling, and modern art pieces that cost more than a suburban house. Seated on a sprawling white leather sofa in the center of the room was my sister Sloan. Standing by the window, swirling a glass of sparkling water, was our mother, Evelyn. Julian was conveniently absent, hiding behind his wife and mother-in-law to do his dirty work. The moment I stepped onto the plush Persian rug, the temperature in the room seemed to drop drastically. Both women stopped their conversation and turned to look at me. Their faces contorted in simultaneous, unconcealed disgust, as if a large, diseased cockroach had just crawled out of the air conditioning vent and onto their expensive furniture. "Do not step any further onto the rug with those filthy shoes," Sloan commanded sharply, gesturing with a gold pen toward a spot on the bare marble near the doorway. "Stand over there," I complied, keeping my shoulders slumped and my head bowed, playing the role of the submissive, defeated sibling to absolute perfection. "We are not actually going to pay you to clean anything today," Sloan continued, standing up and smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her tailored designer skirt. She walked over to the massive mahogany desk and picked up a thick stack of legal documents bound in a blue folder. She tossed the heavy folder onto the edge of the desk. It landed with a loud, authoritative thud. "We have a minor administrative annoyance to clear up. That useless, rotting electrical substation Dad left behind when he died. Half of it is legally in your name. Julian needs to clear the entire property lot to finalize his new data center blueprints. You are going to sign your 50% over to me right now." I looked up, widening my eyes to feign confusion and panic. The substation? But Dad said that land might be worth something someday. I need money, Sloan. I can barely afford groceries. Evelyn set her glass down on the windowsill with a sharp clink and stepped forward. Her eyes were hard, flat, and completely devoid of any maternal empathy. Do not argue with your sister, Reagan. You will sign the transfer deed today. In exchange, Sloan has generously agreed to give you a cashier's check for $2,000. That is more than enough for someone like you to survive on for a few months. $2,000? I let my voice crack, forcing a desperate tremor into my throat. Mom, please. $2,000 is nothing in this city. If Julian is building a massive data center, that land has to be worth hundreds of thousands. Please do not do this to me. I have nothing left. Sloan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. You have nothing left because you are a failure, Reagan. You are a thief who ruined her own career and brought massive shame to this family. You are lucky we are even offering you a single dime. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The physical pain forced genuine tears to well up and spill over my eyelashes. I let my hands shake violently. I began to hyperventilate, putting on the performance of a lifetime. Please, I sobbed, wrapping my arms around my torso as if trying to hold my shattered life together. Please do not take the only thing I have left. I am begging you. Seeing me completely broken, crying, and begging on their expensive floor filled both women with immense visible satisfaction. Sloan smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk that radiated pure venom. Evelyn simply crossed her arms, looking down at me from her pedestal of fake superiority. Let me make this perfectly clear for you, Reagan, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. If you do not pick up that pen and sign that document right this second, you will not get the $2,000. Furthermore, I will personally make a few phone calls to my friends who own the major staffing agencies in this city. I will ensure that you cannot even get a job washing dishes or scrubbing public toilets in Chicago. I will starve you out of this state. Do you understand me? I let out a pathetic, defeated whimper. I slowly dragged my worn sneakers across the marble, approaching the desk like a prisoner walking to the execution block. My hands were trembling so violently that I could barely hold the gold pen Sloan shoved toward me. Tears dripped from my chin, landing in dark, wet spots on the crisp legal paper. I pressed the nib to the signature line and hastily scribbled my name, legally transferring 100% of my ownership of the substation directly into Sloan's name. Good, Sloan sneered, snatching the document away the exact millisecond I finished crossing the final letter. She handed me a crisp white envelope containing the meager check. Now take your hand out, go back to the slums where you belong, and never contact us again. I clutched the envelope to my chest, giving them one last terrified, tearful look before turning around and hurrying out of the executive suite. I walked down the long, silent corridor and stepped back into the steel box of the service elevator. As the heavy doors slid shut, sealing me in complete privacy, a miraculous transformation occurred. My violently trembling hands instantly went completely still. My slumped, defeated posture vanished as I straightened my spine. I reached up and casually wiped the fake tears from my cheeks. The pathetic, weeping beggar was gone, instantly replaced by the phantom architect of their imminent destruction. Sloan and Evelyn were completely blinded by their own massive arrogance. They thought they had just bullied a helpless woman out of a valuable real estate asset. They were catastrophically wrong. That decaying electrical substation was not an asset. It was a ticking legal time bomb. 10 years ago, the federal government had quietly rezoned that specific industrial sector. The rotting infrastructure of that substation sat directly on top of a highly sensitive main municipal fiber optic intersection. Because the property had been entirely abandoned and unmaintained for over a decade, It was in catastrophic, flagrant violation of the Federal Cybersecurity Safety Act. It posed a massive environmental and digital security hazard to the city grid. The Department of Energy and federal regulators had been quietly building a massive legal case against the property for years. By aggressively forcing me to sign away my half of the deed, Sloan and Julian had just voluntarily absorbed 100% of the legal liability. They did not just acquire a piece of land. They just legally adopted a mandatory remediation penalty and federal fine totaling exactly $60 million. A fine that was due immediately upon transfer of ownership. But the trap was even deeper than that. Julian did not have $60 million to pay the federal government. His entire data center project, his home, and his personal assets were all currently mortgaged to the breaking point. And the primary lender holding the exorbitant, high-yield debt that was funding his failing empire was Vanguard Capital, my company. I stood in the descending elevator, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. They thought they had just buried me for $2,000. They did not realize they had just eagerly locked themselves inside a burning building, and I was the only person holding the key. Exactly 3 weeks later, a simple, understated cream envelope arrived at Sloan and Julian's penthouse. Inside was a standard wedding invitation. It stated, in plain black ink, that Reagan Armstrong was marrying a systems engineer. The venue listed was a vague, unpretentious address located deep in the affluent northern suburbs. To my sister and mother, this invitation was not a request to share in my joy. It was a massive neon target. It was the ultimate opportunity for them to descend from their ivory tower, parade their immense wealth in front of my supposedly poor, working-class friends, and firmly crush whatever small, pathetic ounce of happiness I had managed to scrape together. Sloan spent an exorbitant amount of time preparing for the event. She draped herself in a loud, heavily beaded silver designer gown that was aggressively flashy, intended to completely upstage the bride. Evelyn wore a severe, custom-tailored emerald suit dripping with heavy gold jewelry. They wanted to look like absolute royalty stepping into a peasant village. But while the women were busy sharpening their claws, Julian was silently disintegrating in the back seat of their chauffeured limousine. Behind his stiff, custom-fitted tuxedo, his shirt was completely soaked in cold, terrified sweat. Just 48 hours prior, the federal hammer had finally dropped. He had received a certified, unavoidable legal mandate from the Department of Energy, holding him personally responsible for a $60 million cybersecurity, an environmental remediation penalty regarding the substation he had stolen from me. Immediately following that catastrophic blow, he received a severe, non-negotiable summons from Vanguard Capital, his largest and most aggressive anonymous creditor. The most terrifying part for Julian was that the address for the Vanguard Capital mandatory meeting was exactly the same as the address on my wedding invitation, scheduled for the exact same hour. Julian's mind, fractured by immense panic and sheer arrogance, had violently rejected reality. He had convinced himself of a desperate, delusional fantasy. He firmly believed that Vanguard Capital was hosting a highly exclusive, secret financial summit for billionaires at this suburban estate, and they had summoned him to offer a massive bailout package. In his warped reality, the fact that my wedding was at the same address merely meant that I, the pathetic, broke sister, was likely a temporary servant or groundskeeper who had been granted permission to exchange cheap vows in some muddy, forgotten corner of the service garden. When their limousine turned off the main highway and approached the address, the arrogant sneers on Sloan and Evelyn's faces instantly froze. They were not pulling into a rundown community center or a cheap public park. The vehicle was stopped by a massive wrought iron security gate manned by heavily armed private contractors. Beyond the gates lay the crown jewel of Ethelgard Dynamics. It was a breathtaking, sprawling private estate situated on 300 pristine acres of manicured land. The architecture was a terrifyingly beautiful blend of dark Gothic stone and sleek, modern glass. As their driver navigated the long, sweeping driveway, Julian stared out the window with bulging eyes. The valet line was not filled with rusty sedans. It was an endless, glittering ocean of blacked-out Maybachs, armored Rolls-Royces, and custom Ferraris. They stepped out of their car and walked into the grand foyer, their aggressive, flashy outfits suddenly looking incredibly cheap and desperate against the backdrop of true, quiet, generational wealth. The massive ballroom was illuminated by 3 towering crystal chandeliers. A live string quartet played a haunting, beautiful symphony in the corner. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided through the room carrying silver trays of imported caviar and vintage champagne. But it was the guest list that made Julian's knees physically buckle. Everywhere he looked, he saw the absolute titans of the global economy. He saw 2 sitting United States senators chatting quietly by a massive stone fireplace. He saw the elusive chief executive officers of 3 major Wall Street hedge funds. He saw the tech moguls who owned the very infrastructure of the internet. Sloane gripped her designer clutch so hard, her knuckles turned stark white. She leaned close to her mother, her voice trembling with aggressive denial. "She must be working here," Sloane hissed, desperately trying to keep her illusion alive. "Reagan is probably in the kitchen washing these glasses. The owners are just letting her use the backyard before her shift starts. We are here for Julian's investor summit." Julian did not hear her. The air in his lungs had turned to solid lead. The claustrophobic dread of his collapsing empire was crushing his chest. He spotted a legendary, notoriously ruthless venture capitalist standing near the grand mahogany staircase. This man was a known proxy for Vanguard Capital. Driven by pure, unadulterated desperation, Julian practically sprinted across the marble floor, pushing past a federal judge to reach him. "Sir," Julian gasped, his voice cracking, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Sir, I am Julian Vance. I received the Vanguard summons. I know the data center numbers look bad, but I just need a restructuring extension. I can explain the federal penalty. I just need a bridge loan of $70 million to secure the grid." The billionaire did not even look at Julian. He did not offer a handshake. He simply held up one single finger, demanding absolute silence. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low, murmuring conversations of the world's most powerful people vanished instantly, replaced by a heavy, reverent silence. The billionaire slowly stepped back, bowing his head slightly in profound respect. Julian turned around, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. High above the ballroom floor, at the top of the grand sweeping staircase, the massive, heavy mahogany doors leading to the master balcony slowly began to open. The heavy mahogany doors at the top of the grand balcony swung outward, pushed open by 2 immaculately dressed ushers. A blinding wash of pure golden light spilled from the private suite, casting long shadows across the ballroom floor below. I stepped out of the light and approached the marble railing. I was not wearing some cheap, off-the-rack lace gown. I was draped in a breathtaking, custom-tailored haute couture masterpiece crafted from heavy ivory silk, and structured architectural lines that made me look less like a blushing bride and entirely like a reigning monarch about to deliver a royal decree. A sharp, sweeping cape fell from my shoulders, pooling elegantly onto the floor. Standing immediately to my right, holding my hand with a firm, protective grip, was my groom. He was absolutely not a humble, low-level systems engineer. His name was Marcus, and he was widely known across the entire financial sector as the most ruthless, bloodthirsty corporate restructuring attorney in the United States. He was a man who legally dismantled global monopolies before his morning coffee. The moment my silver heel touched the top step of the grand staircase, a profound, chilling phenomenon occurred. The sprawling sea of senators, tech titans, and Wall Street barons did not just politely applaud. They physically parted, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly to the center of the ballroom. In perfect, terrifying unison, the most powerful people in the country slightly bowed their heads. A low, reverent murmur of Madam Chairman echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The sheer force of that truth struck Julian, Sloane, and Evelyn like a runaway freight train. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched the exact second their artificial reality violently shattered. Julian stopped breathing. His jaw went entirely slack, and the crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering into dozens of pieces against the imported marble floor. The anonymous, terrifying apex predator known as Vanguard Capital, the entity that currently held his life, his business, and his breath in its massive jaws, was not a secret syndicate of foreign billionaires. It was the sister they had thrown into the freezing snow 10 years ago. Sloane's mind completely snapped. Unable to process the catastrophic inversion of power, she descended into immediate, hysterical madness. She broke away from her paralyzed husband and began screaming at the top of her lungs, her heavily beaded designer dress violently shaking as she flailed her arms. "She is a fraud!" Sloane shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly over the complete silence of the ballroom. "Arrest her right now! She is a thief! She is a minimum-wage janitor who cleans my floors! She broke in here! Somebody call the police and have this disgusting woman removed!" A dozen heavily armed private security contractors immediately stepped forward from the shadows, their hands resting on their tactical belts, ready to violently subdue her. I simply raised one single finger, gesturing for them to stand down. I did not say a word to my sister. I did not even look at her. I began my descent. I walked down the grand marble staircase with slow, measured, predatory steps. The sharp click of my heels echoed like a metronome counting down the final seconds of their miserable lives. As I reached the ballroom floor, I completely ignored Sloane, walking right past her manic, screaming face as if she were nothing more than a foul-smelling breeze. I stopped directly in front of Julian. The sheer, crushing weight of my presence was too much for him to physically bear. His knees buckled completely. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor, looking up at me with hollow, terrified, animalistic eyes, gasping for air that his lungs refused to process. I looked down at the pathetic, ruined man. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I spoke with a voice that was perfectly calm, terrifyingly flat, and completely devoid of any human mercy. My words carried through the cavernous room with absolute lethal clarity. "Julian Vance," I announced, making sure every billionaire in the room heard the final execution order. "Your massive data center project is officially insolvent. Your primary holding company is completely bankrupt. Your home is foreclosed. Vanguard Capital has officially accelerated the terms of your high-yield debt. We are seizing your entire portfolio effective as of 5 minutes ago. You have absolutely nothing left." Julian let out a pathetic, guttural whimper, clutching at the hem of my silk cape. "Please," he gasped, tears streaming down his face. "Please, Reagan. The federal fine. I cannot pay the fine. I am begging you. I will go to federal prison." I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. I shifted my gaze toward Sloane, who had suddenly stopped screaming, her face draining of all color as the reality of my trap finally penetrated her thick skull. "You will not have to worry about the federal fine, Julian," I said smoothly, my eyes locked on my sister. "Because exactly 3 weeks ago, Sloane forced me to sign away my half of the abandoned electrical substation. She aggressively insisted on taking 100% legal ownership of the property. Therefore, I want to publicly thank my incredibly generous sister for voluntarily absorbing the $60 million federal penalty in my place. She took the debt, she took the environmental hazard, and she hammered the final nail into the coffin of your entire existence." Sloane staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth as she let out a hollow, agonizing gasp. The $2,000 check she had thrown at my feet had just purchased her a lifetime of crippling federal debt and absolute public ruin. Evelyn suddenly broke through the crowd. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch was completely gone. She threw herself onto the floor next to Julian, ruining her custom emerald suit, her heavy gold jewelry clanking against the stone. She grabbed my hand, sobbing hysterically, completely humiliating herself in front of the most elite members of society. "Reagan, please," Evelyn wailed, tears destroying her heavy makeup. "You cannot do this to us. We are your blood. We are your family. Please, show some mercy to your family." I smoothly but forcefully ripped my hand away from her desperate grasp. I looked down at the three of them, a tangled, weeping pile of garbage on my pristine floor. I raised my hand and signaled the head of my security detail. "Family," I stated, my voice echoing like a steel blade slicing through the room, "are the people who picked me up out of the freezing snow when I was dying. They are the people who gave me a warm cup of coffee and taught me how to survive the dark. You are not family. You are simply toxic financial liabilities that my company has just successfully liquidated." The security team descended instantly. Massive men in black suits grabbed Julian, Sloane, and Evelyn by their arms, hauling them off the marble floor. They kicked, screamed, and sobbed, begging for a mercy they had never once shown me. I watched with absolute, unblinking satisfaction as they were forcefully dragged backward across the ballroom, hauled out through the massive oak doors, and thrown out into the cold, unforgiving night. The heavy doors slammed shut with a definitive, echoing boom. The cancer was finally excised. I turned my back on the entrance. I looked up the aisle toward the altar, where my husband was waiting for me with a proud, loving smile. The string quartet smoothly transitioned into a bright, triumphant symphony. I took a deep, clean breath of air, lifted my chin, and walked gracefully forward into my beautiful, untouchable empire, leaving the rotting corpse of my past permanently locked outside in the cold. Hello again to all our amazing listeners, and thank you so much for tuning in to the very end of today's story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As a quick reminder, if you enjoyed this story and want to help keep the channel alive since YouTube disabled our monetization, please consider supporting us with just a $1 donation. You can do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity goes directly toward paying our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families, and allowing us to continue creating more thrilling revenge stories for you. Thank you so much for your support, and I will see you in the next one.